Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Heidi Keeley. I'm the Head of Communications at the Charities Regulator. I'd like to welcome you all today and thank you very much for registering for our second Meet the Charities Regulator webinar. So I'm just going to give you a very quick run through of what you're going to see in the next hour. First of all, our Chief Executive, Helen Martin, will welcome you all, and then you'll have two presentations. So the first of those presentations will be from Thomas Mulholland, and Tom is the Head of Compliance and Enforcement at the Regulator. And then the second presentation will be from Yelena Krishenko, and Yelena is the expert in the Charities Governance Code, so she'll be speaking to you about the Governance Code. After that, then we'll have a Q&A. So we got some questions in advance, but also at the bottom of your screen, if you're using a desktop or a laptop computer, you'll see a Q&A function there. Now you can type in a question and press enter. You can submit it anonymously if you like. And then at the end, during the Q&A session, I'll put some of those frequently asked questions to our panelists. Now, if we don't get your question today, we will try and address those questions at future webinars or in future engagement with charities. And just to let you know that we will be recording today's session, and we'll be hoping to make those videos available on our website then once our series of webinars is complete. So I'll hand you over now to Helen Martin, Chief Executive of the Charities Regulator.
Thanks very much, Heidi. Thank you. And look, I would like to reiterate Heidi's welcome and thank you all for attending. I'm conscious that some of you attended yesterday's seminar, so some of what I'm about to say will be familiar to you. But as a number of today's attendees did not attend yesterday's webinar, I think it's important just to touch briefly on some of the key points that we made yesterday at the outset of the webinar. So, we know from our day-to-day interactions with you and the survey which we carried out early in the pandemic, that the challenges being faced by charities are significant at present. And, we have situations where there are temporary and in some cases continuing closures or significant restriction of activities due to physical distancing requirements. Also a significant reduction in fundraised and earned income for some charities, leading to financial difficulties. And certainly there's in general great uncertainty for all of those organisations in the sector. So you'll be aware that our immediate response in terms of assisting the sector was to formulate COVID-specific FAQs. And the purpose of those was to give you a source of information as charity trustees that you could tap into. And in some of those frequently asked questions, you'll see that we've linked into other available information and resources that are out there, so that you have that available to you also. For example, if your charity is looking to reopen at the moment, you can find links in our FAQs to guidance that was recently issued by Pobl and also some guidance that was issued by Volunteer Ireland. Both have produced guidance which is written specifically for the community voluntary and charity sector in mind, and therefore it's accessible as a result, and it's very much targeted to you. So certainly if you've got any concerns about reopening, have a look at that. So look, as part of our initial response, you'd also be aware that we did have a national radio campaign initially. And what we were trying to do with that was to ensure that the public were aware that there was a register of charities there and that they should be looking and checking that register before donating their time or money, because we wanted to make sure that things that were intended to go towards registered charities did in fact end up there. We also carried out a survey, and that survey was really important in terms of gauging the immediate impact that the pandemic had on charities. So we received 2,223 responses. It was hugely informative, and I want to thank everybody who responded to it. We were able to share that information both with the public but also with other stakeholders as well, and that's really important. We will be issuing further surveys. I did say this yesterday, and I would ask, if you have time, please do respond, because the more responses that we receive, the more targeted we can be and the more informed we can be in terms of our regulatory response as a regulator. In addition, we took action with regard to annual reporting requirements. So for some of you, particularly newer charities, you may be wondering, well, what is the annual report? The annual report is a short online form that all charities are required to fill out 10 months, within 10 months of the end of their financial year end. And that information that you will have to fill out will be things like, what are the activities that your charity was engaged in the previous year? How many employees do you have? There's a band for you to select. Roughly how many volunteers do you have? And what's your funding? What are the sources of those funds in the previous year? So it's a reasonably discrete document, and it's not to be confused with the annual report that some charities will produce for their stakeholders. So this would be a much larger document whereby you'd be including your financial statements, your director's report. You'll be talking about your activities. You may have photos of different events and different activities that you're engaged in. Although it's called an annual report, that's not what we're referring to. The annual report that we refer to is a statutory requirement under the Charities Act, and it's a reasonably short form. And I think, in terms of it, being accessible and being something that the charity sector has engaged in, we've seen greatly increased levels of compliance with it, which would indicate to us that it's not something that's seen as a particular burden to charities, but it is very important because it gives certain key information about your charity. So this was something that, as I said, we'd mentioned yesterday, and we've actually extended the deadline on 2 occasions now, so most recently to the 31st of October 2020. And this was in recognition of the significant practical difficulties that registered charities faced, particularly during lockdown, in terms of trying to get physical access to the kind of information that they would need in order to finalise their accounts for the previous year. As mentioned yesterday, there's no immediate plan to extend the deadline further at this stage, but we are keeping it under review and we will respond appropriately as we have done to date. So at the moment, the date is the 31st of October. I mentioned yesterday that October is already the busiest time of the year each year for the Charities Regulator. So if there are any of you out there that are in a position to file your annual report early, we would be really grateful if you would do that, because what it means is that it means that we can deal with any queries that you have at a less busy time of year, and it also frees up the resources of our contact centre for those charities that maybe have a lot more queries or are struggling a bit more than you are. So as I said, if you could file early, we'd really appreciate it if you could do that. Another thing that was mentioned yesterday was the governance code, and we're very conscious that the current public health crisis means that no matter what particular challenge your charity is facing, as charity trustees, you are making really difficult and are having to make really serious decisions. As a result, it's absolutely essential that those decisions are discussed by your charity's board or committee, and that all of those decisions are recorded by way of meeting minutes. If you're doing this already, then you're already meeting a significant number of the standards that are set out in the code. In addition, if you're a new charity, a lot of the work that you would have had to do in relation to registering as a charity will be of benefit to you in terms of the governance code, because a lot of the different policies that charities should have in place as a matter of good practice, you will have already been asked about those as part of the registration process. So in terms of describing, I suppose, what the code is, we all know that it's a document. It sets out in plain English the legal requirements that you have as a charity to make sure that your charity is well run, and it also includes best practice in certain areas as well. So it's a mix of both. In that sense, the code is not really about a compliance tool from our perspective. It's really about a compliance tool from your own perspective as charity trustees. It's a document that you can work your way through and assure yourselves that as a charity you're doing things well, that you're meeting those standards that are set out. And also the compliance record form is again another tool whereby you can satisfy yourselves that you're in a position to evidence that you have applied and met those standards and how you've done that. So Elena will be talking about that later on in her presentation to you. She's doing the second part of a presentation here today. What I would say though is that for those of you that are worried about, what is going to happen next year in terms of reporting on that, on your compliance with the code, what I would say is don't worry. you know, the diversity that we always talk about when we discuss charity, the charity sector, also has significance at a time like this. As I said yesterday, we may all be in the same storm, we definitely are, but we are all in very different boats. And I want to assure you that the Charities Regulator recognises this and will be sensitive to the challenges that are faced by any particular issues that have arisen for charities as a result of the pandemic. There was never an expectation that in 2021, 100% of all registered charities were going to be in a position to declare that they were in full compliance with the code in year one. But, you know, in the same way as it took time to see increased levels of compliance with annual reporting requirements, we're conscious that it may take a period of time to see that kind of compliance levels that are needed to provide assurance to the wider public with regard to standards of governance in the sector. As a result, we're committed to monitoring the situation closely so that we can provide targeted guidance to you on the code where it's required. We'll continue to add to our toolkit whatever else we can do. And we're also conscious of the need to ensure that we report on compliance with the code, particularly in the early days, in a way that acknowledges the journey that charities are on in terms of working within the code as a charity, and also using the code to assure the public that your individual charity is well run. And as a result, the public can have confidence in your individual charity, and that they can have that trust and confidence in you when they are donating either time or money to your cause. And that's really what the governance code is about. And if we concentrate as individuals on what we're doing in relation to your individual charities, then hopefully that will spread across the sector as a whole, and the code becomes a really useful reference point and tool for the overall sector. So in terms of the guidance that we have available to you, we're also intending to complement what's available at present with some online training. So it won't be possible for us to provide training to the 72,896 charity trustees that are now on the register, but we will be making videos of those training sessions available. So that will be a further resource that it'll be available to all charity trustees, and it'll be there as and when you require it and when you want to dip into that. Before I pass you over to our Head of Compliance and Enforcement, I just want to highlight a few key takeaways from yesterday's presentation on the Register of Charities. And I'm going to ask Heidi now to run 3 polls for me. The first is, I just want to see how many of you here today are charity trustees, employees, volunteers, or other. So I'm going to ask you to fill that out, if you could, just give me a sense of who's here today. I have a second poll that I also want to ask you to fill out as well, and it relates to the register. And it's going to be asking you, do you know who in your charity is responsible for keeping your entry on the register updated? The third question then that I'm going to be asking you about is related to how you were registered. So I'm going to keep talking while these polls were coming up, because I don't want we had a bit of dead air yesterday, so we're trying to avoid that today. So one of the key messages that came out yesterday from Eamon O'Halloran's presentation, and he's our Head of Registration and Projects, was, so I see that we've 68% charity trustees here today. We've got 7% volunteers, okay, we've got employees as well. Really, really good, a good mix. And we've got more charity trustees, it seems, here today than we did yesterday. So one of the main points that Eamon made yesterday was in relation to checking the register. And what he said was there's kind of a handy acronym, ACT. So this stands for Accurate, Control and Timely. So the first thing is, as charity trustees, I would ask each and every one of you to check your entry on the register and make sure that all of the information there is accurate. The next thing that you absolutely need to know as trustees is who in your organisation is responsible for updating and inputting information on the register on behalf of your charity. So that is the person who, when, for example, a new trustee is appointed or a current trustee resigns, immediately is told by the charity trustees to get on the register and ensure that that information is updated. Who is that person in your charity? It is absolutely essential that you know. It doesn't have to be a charity trustee, but it has to be someone who is familiar with your charity, and also someone that you know as charity trustees is responsible for this. So I can see that some people, with a small number, who don't know who that is, I would say just to make sure that you get onto that. But I see that most people, it's either charity trustee or an employee, or it's somebody that you know. So that's great. The next thing is that the updates have to be timely. So don't wait until, you know, for example, you're doing your annual report. You should be immediately making these changes so that it's absolutely current on any given day of the week. And one of the things, I can't stress enough how important it is to make sure that your entry is accurate. We had a query yesterday from somebody who was on our webinar yesterday, who was saying that they had attended the webinar yesterday and they decided on foot of that to check the register. And they saw that the charity's principal place of business was listed as the charity trustee's address. And therefore, the charity trustee in question hadn't actually appreciated that it was their home address that was appearing on the register. Now, a charity's principal place of business appears on the register pursuant to Section 39 of the Charities Act. So that's a required piece of information on the register. So what I would say to that person is your circumstances may have changed. Your charity may now be operating from somewhere else. So, you know, make sure that you get in touch with the Charities Regulator on our new number, which is 01 211 8600, and talk to one of the Charities Regulators contact team, and they can talk you through the process there. We're open from 11 to 3 p.m. each day, Monday to Friday. So the second major point that Eamon made was to know whether your charity was registered by the Charities Regulator or whether your charity was automatically placed on the register as a result of having a charitable tax exemption from revenue. This is really important, okay, because if you were registered further to an application that you made to the Charities Regulator, losing your charitable tax exemption from revenue won't automatically affect your charitable status under the Charities Act, okay? I can see that there's 45% of you there now who automatically got on the register by reason of having a CHY number from revenue, which means that you never had to make an application to the Charities Regulator, okay? For those of you, for that 45%, it is absolutely essential that you keep in touch with revenue and that you keep up to speed with ensuring that you're meeting revenue's requirements with regard to your charitable tax exemption. If you lose your charitable tax exemption, you are automatically, by operation of the Charities Act, removed from the register, okay? This is beyond the control of the Charities Regulator, and we have had situations where people have not kept up contact with revenue and haven't continued to meet revenue's requirements with their charitable tax status, and as a result they've been taken off the register and they've lost their charitable status, and that means that you have to make a fresh and entirely new application to the Charities Regulator, and you shouldn't be continuing your operations until such time as you're again registered. So our head of registration yesterday provided a really handy tip if you are unsure. So I saw a few people there were unsure of how they were registered. If you check your registered charity number, which is an 8-digit number, if it starts with a 201 or a 202, then you are registered by the Charities Regulator. If your RCN, your registered charity number, starts with 200, and you are not, you are registered automatically, and therefore you need to be really careful and make sure that you keep up to date and keep engaged with revenue. If you don't know your RCN, this came up yesterday, what I would say is just go onto the Charities Regulator website, check the register, type in the name of your charity, and all of your charity details will come up, including your registered charity number. And finally, speaking of revenue, we did have a query yesterday in relation to the VAT compensation scheme. This is a scheme subject to an annual cap of 5 million. It's designed to partially compensate charities for VAT paid in the day-to-day running of a charity. While the Charities Regulator has absolutely no involvement in the scheme, if you have any queries, please go on to revenue.ie. What I can tell you is that that deadline was extended to the 31st of August, and that was a query that we had yesterday, and it was in direct response to the current crisis. So registered charities are entitled to claim a refund. So I would say, encourage you to consider submitting a claim, and certainly, check out Revenue's website if you haven't done so already. You have until the 31st of August. So look, on that note, I'm going to thank you again for joining us here today, and I'm going to pass you over to our Head of Compliance and Enforcement, Thomas Mulholland.
Hello everybody, thank you for that, Helen. Okay, my name is Thomas Mulholland. I am Head of Compliance and Enforcement with the Charities Regulator. So I'm going to give you a brief overview today of the functions of the Compliance and Enforcement Unit. So what do we do within the Charities Regulator? Well, we provide some of the key functions of the Charities Regulator. We promote compliance by charities and charity trustees with their legal duties. We encourage and facilitate the better administration and management of charitable organisations by the provision of information and advice. So basically, we provide a lot of advice and guidance to charities and charity trustees. And we do that, a lot of it is done by way of published guidance on our website. If you look at our website, a lot of guidance on a wide range of topics, everything from conflicts of interest to taking minutes of meetings to the governance code. There's a lot of information available on the website. We also provide guidance by way of our interaction with charities by phone call or email. So another major function of the Compliance and Enforcement Unit is that we need to ensure and monitor compliance by charities with the Charities Act 2009. And how do we do that? Well, the main way we do that is by dealing with concerns that are raised. So concerns is a complaint. We refer to them as concerns in the Charities Regulator. And concerns can be raised a number of ways. They can be raised internally by the Charities Regulator ourselves, carrying out our work. We may come across an issue that will have to be looked into. But the main source of concerns we receive is from our Raise a Concern section on our website. And again, it's available on our website. Anybody can go in and raise a concern. It can be a trustee, it can be an employee of a charity, it can be a donor, a member of the public. Anybody can raise a concern into a charity, and we will look at all the concerns that are raised. Concerns can also be raised anonymously, so there's no need to give a name or contact details if the person doesn't believe that's necessary. But it can be more difficult for us to follow up on those kind of concerns. So it also has to be said that we deal with concerns based on facts. So the Charities Regulator, we act in the public interest. So our interest in relation to any concern is in relation to breaches of the charity law. Okay, so we're interested in breaches of the Charities Act 2009. Internal issues in relation to disputes between directors, or the issue of maybe perhaps service provided to a service user. Those are internal issues for a charity, and we wouldn't normally get involved in those kind of concerns. It's normally just, like I say, our focus is on breaches of the Charities Act. So every year we receive approximately 650 concerns. Now that might sound like a lot of concerns, but when you actually look at it at the end of 2019, there was 10,500 registered charities, and there's been more since we're over 11,000 registered charities on the register now. And also in relation to concerns, there's nearly a 50-50 split between concerns that we receive in relation to unregistered organisations. So these are concerns in relation to organisations that are not registered charities. So that might be an organisation that's carrying out charitable work. It's not a registered charity. It's brought to our attention by way of concern, and we would direct that organisation to our registration unit, encourage them to get registered as a registered charity. Another major source, probably the biggest single type of concern we get, is in relation to clothing collections. These are just your basic bin bag in the door collections that come in with a request for a clothing donation that says leave the bin out or leave the bag out, and it'll be collected on Thursday. These type of collections, like I said, they're our most common type of concern. And we deal with those concerns, and we also had a campaign, as Helen mentioned earlier on, about check the register. So we would always ask people to check the register, find out if that organisation seeking a donation is a registered charity, and if so, they can decide whether to give a donation to that charity or not. So like I said, half of concerns are in relation to unregistered charities, and just over half of concerns are related to registered charities. So of the 650 concerns, like I say, only half of them are related to registered charities. It's only about 2.5% of all registered charities. So the real message I'm trying to get across there is that charities, by and large, are well run, and they carry out their activity in a responsible and correct way, and they're governed in a proper manner. So I just want to emphasise that we're aware of that the Charities Regulator, even in the Compliance Unit, we're aware that most charities are run in a proper manner. However, it does obviously happen that issues come to our attention that raise serious issues in relation to charities. So I'm going to talk a bit here about the serious issues, which I say is very much the minority of concerns we receive. And there's two main factors that come up time and time again in relation to serious issues, and that is the control of a charity and transparency of a charity. So what I would say to all trustees is, if you're a trustee of a charity, you must be in control of that charity. You must be aware of how decisions are made in that charity. You must be aware of the activity of that charity and how that activity is carried out. Now, serious issues can arise, like I say, if that control is dominated normally by a single person, whether that person is a trustee, a CEO, maybe the original founder of the charity. They can dominate the charity, and it can lead to a situation where information or control is concentrated on one person. So the other trustees may not be aware of decisions that are made, may not be in control of decisions that are made. And that can be a difficult situation. But what my point to you is, as a charity trustee, you must ask the difficult questions. You must face those challenges. And I'm not saying it's easy. It can certainly be difficult. And that's why, again, why we're here to help and advise. So an example would be something in relation to salaries. This can be a thorny issue in charities. It can happen that charities can evolve over time and nobody's exactly sure what the benchmark is for the salary levels that are in a charity, or there may not be contracts of employment in place. But these are serious issues for a charity. And if your charity is in a situation like that, it certainly would lead us to believe there's not control of that charity. So a question that I also ask for trustees, if I'm ever talking to trustees, ask them a simple question. And I will ask you now this: if you're a trustee of a charity, how many credit cards are in operation of your charity? If you don't know how many credit cards are in operation in your charity, I would ask you, why don't you know? Where are the statements for these credit cards going? Who is reviewing expenditure on these credit cards? You'd be amazed how many times we get a concern in relation to a charity. We ask these questions, and the trustees simply don't know how many credit cards are in operation. So there's an example of a simple check that can be carried out. Same thing with bank accounts. How many bank accounts do your charity have? Have you seen statements for those bank accounts? And if not, why not? Even another thing like a PayPal account. Oftentimes we've come across situations where money's coming from a PayPal account, it's been lodged transferred into the bank account of the charity, but there may be payments going out directly out of that payment at that PayPal account that trustees may not be aware of. So again, it's just a matter of being in control, being aware of these issues. And I want to promote a document. Anytime I'm talking to, giving a presentation or talking to anyone, this is the document I also refer to. It's called Internal Financial Control Guidelines for Charities. And there's the picture put up on your screen. This, in my view, is an excellent document. If any charity trustee were to go through that document, answer all the questions in an honest and meaningful way, by the time you come to the end of that document, and if you've answered all those questions, I would be confident that you can display that you are in full control of the finances of that charity. So it's a really useful document that's available on our website. I've just pulled up one page there. You can see part A there. So actually, in relation to the credit cards, does the charity have debit cards or credit cards in use? Simple question. And in section G there, are credit card statements sent to the responsible charity department and independently checked? Now, I realise a lot of charities will be very small. They're not going to have independent departments, but there definitely should be a division of duties. If one person is spending money on a credit card, somebody else should be checking the statement, making sure that all the expenditure is proper and for the purposes of the charity. So that was the first issue in relation to control. So the second issue, like I said, was in relation to transparency. And again, my experience of dealing with charities is that the more information a charity makes publicly available, the less likely we, the Charities Regulator, are to receive a concern. So the more information you give out as a charity, the better, as far as we're concerned. And the reason for that is that funds mainly come from the public. So the public are very interested, and they're also entitled to receive information as to how their funds are being spent and the details on how the use of those funds. And I realise that decision making for charities can be a difficult issue. Charities, especially in the current environment, trustees are making very difficult decisions. And again, I've been asked, what is the kind of standard that we have to set ourselves for making decisions as trustees? And again, my simple answer to that would be, always think, if you're making a decision as a trustee, think if you're in a private meeting with the other trustees. But think if this was a public meeting and everybody was able to see the decision we were making and they had all the information we have, would our decision remain the same or would we change it? If your decision would remain the same, that would, in my view, would probably be a good decision. If you would change your decision if everybody knew all the facts of the case, that may not be such a good decision. So I would also always advocate being able to stand over and defend, justify any decision you made. And the way to do that is to think, if everybody knew about this decision, would they agree with me? Now, everybody may not always agree. People may not agree. But I'm just saying you should be able to, in a position to justify your decision. So an example of transparency, this most simple example would be in relation to financial statements. Again, if you're a charity trustee, are your full financial statements available to view on your website or are they publicly available? And again, the question I would ask is, if they're not available, why not? I can't think of any reason why your full financial statement should not be available to the general public. It promotes your charity and it also assists you in good governance and can help you in the activities that you carry out. Now, oftentimes we see that charities use, especially charities who are also registered companies, that they may release their abridged financial statements. These are the statements that can be filed in the company's registration office. Now they're financial statements with lesser information. And again, I would say it's not those financial statements should be made available. It should be the full financial statements. So it should be possible for a charity basically to give out a lot of information in relation to activity it carries out. And this can be done even by, you can release information by anonymizing it or put it in a table. For example, here is a table of the salary levels in an organization. You can see here, it gives all the information in relation to the level of salaries in the organization, but it doesn't give the names of any of the employees. So there's no breach of confidentiality, there's no GDPR issues here. And it just goes to show you can release information that would be of interest and of use to the public. So in the compliance enforcement unit, recent trends, what have we been dealing with? Well, obviously COVID-19 has been a huge issue, and as Helen mentioned earlier on, we had a survey was carried out by the Charities Regulator earlier this year. So I can just say that we're very much aware of the challenges that are facing charities, and we're sensitive to that in any of our interaction with them from the compliance unit. We understand that there's certainly uncertainty regarding the future funding of charities. And when we get queries in relation to this, we would urge charities, advise them to reach out to other charities in your sector, and what are your peers doing, how are they managing to cope, are there synergies to be gained by combining efforts. We've also issued guidance recently on charity reserves. If you need to access your charity reserves, there's a new guidance on the website for that. And also, if a charity takes a decision to wind up, now charities cease operation all the time. They cease operations because they've completed their charitable purpose, or the trustees are just retiring and they're deciding that it's time to wind up the charity. So charities wind up all the time, and there's actually guidance again on our website available, guidance on winding up a charity, which we're in the process of updating, but the updated version will be there shortly. But the key to winding up a charity is that it must be done correctly. Okay, there's certain procedures to follow, and it must be done correctly to protect the stakeholders and you as trustees. And again, I just want to emphasise there has been no particular uptick so far, anyway, in the number of charities that we have seen winding up due to COVID-19. So just interesting to see that, although a lot of charities have indicated that they have difficulties going forward, we haven't seen that reflected in the number of charities who've started the winding up process to date. So overall, governance is a key issue in relation to any of our concerns. So when we contact a charity, we get a concern and we're contacting the charity, governance is a huge issue for us. And one of the most important documents for a charity is the minutes of meetings, because the minutes of meetings records decisions of trustees and decisions that were taken. And one of the first acts in a lot of the cases that we look at, a lot of the concerns that we look at, we'll write out to the charity and ask for copies of their minutes to see if the issue that has been raised has been discussed at board level or trustee level, and to see if it's been discussed, and that will help to direct our inquiries in relation to that charity. So again, Helen mentioned earlier on that minutes are a key document. They're certainly a key document when it comes to concerns, and I also know that there'll be a key document in the completion of the Charities Governing Code, which my colleague Elena is going to talk about now. So I'd like to thank everybody for their attention. That was a bit of a speedy run through the Compliance and Enforcement Unit. And my closing thought for all trustees are the two items: control of your charity and transparency of your charity. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, and welcome everyone. I'll just share my screen now. Sorry. Right. Okay. So my name is Elena Grushenko, and I work in the Compliance and Enforcement Unit in the Charities Regulator. And my presentation today, again, about the Charities Governance Code. Some people attended our webinar yesterday, and I spoke yesterday about the importance of good governance for charities, and how the Charities Governance Code can be used as a tool to help charity trustees to improve governance standards within their charities, and to inform themselves of legal duties of charity trustees and how to comply with them. And Helen spoke about this a little bit today as well. As you know, the code is supported by practical resources, which can be found under the Charities Governance Code Toolkit. And as I mentioned yesterday, there are a number of practical templates that you can use. There is also a completed sample compliance record form that has some examples as to the type of actions you may take to achieve each standard within the code and the type of evidence that you may provide. For the purposes of today's webinar, I just want to run through each principle quickly, and maybe for each principle highlight one or two items that we have most queries on, or maybe an issue that keeps coming up again and again. So the code is structured around 6 principles of good governance, as you know, and here they are on these slides. So they are advancing charitable purpose, behaving with integrity, leading people, exercising control, working effectively, and being accountable and transparent. So if we look at each principle in a little bit more detail now, okay? Under the principle 1, charities must demonstrate that they advance their charitable purpose only, and it must be of public benefit. So the Board of Trustees has to be clear why they exist and the difference they want to make. Can you explain the purpose of your charity? Why are you there? What are you doing? How are you doing it? Who are you trying to help? Everything you do must be in line with your charitable purpose, and we see sometimes charities drift away from the defined objectives as they develop over time. This can also happen when a charity decides to do something new, and without reference to the charity's objects and purposes, the new activity may not be in accordance with what it was set up to do. So it's all centered around your governing document, which sets out what the charity is and how it operates. So the first vital step here is to ensure that all trustees read and understand their governing document and the purpose of their charity. We also get lots of questions in relation to private benefit. And this is in reference to the core standard 1.2. If you have recently gone through the registration process with the Charities Regulator, you should be quite familiar with this concept. Your charity's purpose must benefit the public or a section of the public. An organization that benefits only one person cannot be legally regarded as a charity. It is possible for some private benefit to arise, but in all cases, this must be necessary, reasonable, and ancillary to the public benefit that you're providing. And I suppose one of the obvious examples that everyone would be familiar with is if your charity has a paid employee, there is a private benefit to that employee. So in this case, you should be able to demonstrate that employing someone is ancillary to the public benefit that you provide and is necessary for your organization to provide that public benefit, and that the employee's pay and conditions are reasonable. Other examples would be paying rent, paying someone for services, and again, in all cases, you must demonstrate that it is reasonable, ancillary, and necessary to the public benefit that you are providing. Principle 2 is about behavior with integrity. Charity trustees have to behave with the highest standards of honesty, fairness, and independence. And actually, board behavior can have a huge impact on your charity's reputation and success. A charity can easily be damaged by a dysfunctional board where there is no mutual respect, integrity, accountability. So having a code of conduct for charity trustees is important. And we have a sample available on the website if you need one. One of the common issues here also is in relation to conflicts of interest. And I think it's important to kind of recognize that conflicts of interest may arise, so you cannot avoid them completely. But it's not about trying to avoid them, it's about trying to manage them. So it's important that you are able to identify any conflicts, disclose them, and manage them. And the good starting point for the board is to keep in mind that in everything you do as a trustee, you must always put the interest of your organization first. And if you're not sure if there's a conflict, there's a question on this slide that you can ask yourselves. And in terms of the actions here, you should develop a conflicts of interest policy. And we have a sample on the website again. Conflict of interest should be a standing item on your agenda for all your board meetings. Your conflict of interest policy will set out what to do if conflicts arise, but in general terms, you should remove yourself from any decision making if there is a conflict. And I suppose just to give you a simple example as to how this might work in practice. For example, one of the items on the agenda is for the board to appoint a suitable company to build a shed, for example. And let's say your brother owns one of the companies which is participating in the tender, so there is a conflict. So firstly, you have to make sure that this conflict has been declared to the board. And then when the board gets to that item on the agenda, you simply step outside for this item, so you're not involved in any decision making. And all this is properly recorded in the minutes, so there's evidence to show that the conflict was properly managed. And we would also advise that you establish a register of interest where any actual or potential conflicts are recorded. And again, you will find a sample on the website. So next principle, principle 3, is about leading people. The standards under this principle highlight that charities need to be clear about the roles of everyone working in the charity. And charity trustees are responsible for providing leadership to volunteers, employees, and contractors. So as a trustee, you need to understand your own role well and what is expected from you as a trustee, but you also need to understand roles of others. I suppose as a trustees, you have more like an oversight and planning role, and then management is there to take care about daily operations. So roles and responsibilities of everyone working in your charity should be clearly defined. For example, executive staff need to understand their responsibilities and lines of authority, any communication and reporting with the board. And I suppose in smaller charities, trustees sometimes get involved in daily work, but but I think it's important that you understand, that distinction between kind of governance and management roles. And it's also important to remember, if you delegate, you're still responsible for the work of your organizations. Some charities employ staff, and if you do, you have to comply with employment legislation. And we have seen how some charities that employ people don't even have employment contracts in place, and that's a big issue. And we actually have quite a few templates around this area, like sample code of conduct for employees and volunteers, and also recruitment policies. So if you need some guidance in this area, so please have a look at those documents. Principle 4 is about exercising control. No matter the size and complexity of your charity, the charity trustees must abide by the legal and regulatory requirements that are relevant to the work they do. First of all, get to know your governing document, and I have mentioned it already. It sets out rules for how your charity should operate. As a trustee, you need to follow these rules and make sure that you can refer to your governing document for guidance when you need to. For example, if you're not sure how many people should be present at the board meeting, for that meeting to be valid, you need to check your governing document. You have to comply with the Charities Act. And in addition to that, you might have to comply with other legislation depending on the work of your charity. For example, you will be subject to employment law if you employ staff, as I mentioned earlier. If you're a company, you have to comply with Companies Act. And there could be other things such as health and safety, data protection, child protection, and so on. I suppose when we talk about all this legislation, it seems a lot, but as a charity trustees, you're not expected to have a detailed knowledge of all this legislation, but you should be aware that it exists, and you should take appropriate steps to ensure that you comply with it. Under the Charities Governance Code Toolkit, we have guidance on other legal and regulatory requirements for charities to consider. So you can have a look at that, but you may need some professional advice depending on the complexity of your charity. And as Thomas mentioned, don't be afraid to reach out to other similar charities if you're looking for some guidance. Charity trustees are also responsible for funds and any other assets that their charity holds, and you should have strong controls in place. And Thomas gave you some examples of that. And financial controls are also important in the context of fundraising activities. And our guidance on fundraising sets out, the procedures that you should follow when fundraising from the public. Moving on to the next principle, principle 5, working effectively. So the core standards under these principles are all about the importance of the board of charity trustees working together collectively in order to help their charity to achieve its objectives. And I went through this standard in some detail yesterday, but just to remind you that attending regular meetings is an important part of being a trustee. You need to attend as many meetings as possible, and you need to prepare for those meetings. So you can contribute your views and ideas, and you can play a full part in discussions and collective decision making. And as I mentioned yesterday, and it was mentioned today, that it's really important that minutes are taken and any decisions taken are properly recorded in the minutes. And your meeting minutes can be used as evidence for many core standards within the Charities Governance Code. At a minimum, your agendas should always include things like reporting on activities, review of finances, and conflicts of interest. And we do recognize that some charity trustees have no previous experience of an organization's finances. but it's important that you learn the basics of understanding your charity's accounts. Find out about the current financial situation of your charity. That will include any savings that you may have, any property, or maybe even investments that your charity may have. Make sure that you know about your banking arrangements and any contracts or any debts that your charity has. And just in general terms, know where the money is coming from and how your charity is going to spend it. And finally, principle 6 is about being accountable and transparent to your stakeholders. And Thomas spoke about transparency a bit as well today. And some of the common issues that we see is that charities are not publishing key finance and governance information. So members of the public don't know how their donation was used. And as Thomas said, as a charity, there is no reason why that information is not available to the public. So charity trustees should be willing to explain their actions to their stakeholders and also should be willing to publish and make available key information about their charity. And here are the key dates again, and I went through this yesterday, and I know there's probably a few people who didn't attend yesterday's webinar, so just to remind what they are. So 2020, so that's this year, is the first year that registered charities are required to comply with the code. And I mentioned yesterday that you need to complete your compliance record form, but don't leave it until the end of the year to complete it. It will be a difficult task, so if you try and take it a little bit at a time, we are halfway through the year, so most of you should be working through the compliance record form. But if you haven't started that, there's still time, but make sure that it's on the agenda for the next board meeting so you can start looking at it. And then 2021 will be the first year that registered charities will have to report on their compliance with the code. So this will be as part of your annual report. So when you submit your annual report to the Charities Regulator in 2021, you will have to indicate if you complied with the code. And if you didn't comply with the code or any of the standards within the code, then you'll have to provide an explanation. So that will be when you submit your annual report. And a lot of people ask if they need to submit a completed compliance record form or any evidence to the Charities Regulator. No, you don't need to submit anything. It's just the declaration on your annual report. So don't send the forms or any evidence unless we requested it. And those people who completed their annual report this year would have seen a new question in relation to the Charities Governance Code. And we were asking if charities have commenced the implementation of the code. And that question is there so that we can engage with charities just to see how they're getting on and if there's any other guidance that is needed. And we have actually engaged with a number of charities, and those charities that we have engaged with have made quite a good progress and have provided some really good quality documentation. But as I said, there are guidance and documents available on the website, and I have a link on this slide to the Charities Governance Code Toolkit. So please have a look at that. As I said, there's a completed sample compliance record form. There's also some frequently asked questions in relation to the Charities Governance Code that you can go through. Any questions in relation to the Charities Governance Code, there's a dedicated email address, that's governancecode@charitiesregulator.ie. So please email any questions you may have. And if you want to speak to someone, just ask for a call back and we will give you a call back. So that's the end of my presentation, and thank you.